Welcome to Charette Theory. Today's episode is about creating a kitchen that not only serves your daily needs, but also responds to the reality of living with cold weather, seasonal rhythms, and a slower, more grounded pace of life. We're focusing specifically on the rustic mountain kitchen, a type of space designed to feel reliable, tactile, and genuinely warm. Not just warm in the aesthetic sense, but warm in terms of material choice, spatial flow, and how the space holds up across long, cold mornings. Let's begin by understanding what defines the soul of this kind of kitchen, not just how it looks, but how it works and what it supports. This type of kitchen doesn't try to be sleek or futuristic. Instead, it leans into function, texture, and presence. It uses natural materials, stone, wood, and metal, and organizes itself around durable patterns of use. When you step into it in the early hours of a winter morning, it feels protective and familiar. It isn't overly styled, and it doesn't try to hide the marks of everyday life. Instead, it welcomes them. For many people who live in or dream of a mountain setting, the kitchen becomes the core of the home. It's where the fire is, where the meals are made, where people come together before the outside world wakes up. And if it's designed well, it helps you move through those cold, quiet hours with ease. This episode is going to walk you through how to build that kind of space. We'll break down everything that matters, what to build with, how to lay it out, how to make it feel good in winter, and how to avoid designing something that's purely decorative. Because when it comes to rustic spaces, usefulness and beauty go hand in hand. rustic mountain kitchen is shaped by two things: the environment it belongs to, and the lifestyle it supports. It doesn't follow trends. It doesn't rely on styled accessories or artificially weathered finishes. Its character comes from material honesty and long-term use. The first thing you notice in a well-designed rustic mountain kitchen is that everything feels substantial. The wood is solid. The stone is thick. The handles and hardware are heavy in the hand. Nothing feels lightweight or overly refined. This isn't about roughness for its own sake, it's about creating a sense of reliability. Every surface is meant to be touched, used, leaned against, cleaned, and worn down gently over time. That sense of reliability matters most in the mornings, especially when it's cold. In mountain regions, winter mornings are quiet, but physically intense. The light is dim. The air is dry. You want the space around you to help regulate your experience, not overwhelm it. So the rustic kitchen is built with materials that retain warmth, layout choices that reduce unnecessary movement, and surfaces that don't demand constant maintenance. There's also a lived-in quality that's central to the atmosphere. Nothing in this kitchen should feel pristine or overly arranged. The most successful rustic kitchens look like someone has been using them for years, even if they were just built last season. There might be a hook for drying herbs, a collection of cast iron pans left visible above the stove, or a dish towel hanging from a hand-carved drawer pull. These details don't need to be staged. They're simply part of how the space functions day to day. Unlike modern or minimalist kitchens, where surfaces are often cleared and visual lines are emphasized, the rustic mountain kitchen allows for evidence of daily life. Not clutter, but presence. You might keep dry goods in glass jars on open shelves, let cookware age visibly on its own terms, and accept that the wooden countertop will pick up nicks and scratches as time goes on. Another defining quality of this space is that it ages well. In fact, it's designed to look better after 5 years than it did after 5 days. The finishes are matte, not glossy. The materials are raw, not coated. And the tone of the room, visually and atmospherically, is soft and grounded. Even the sounds in a rustic kitchen are different. Instead of the hum of modern appliances or the hollow sound of hard plastic, there's the solid thud of a wood drawer closing. The scrape of a stool on stone flooring. The click of a ceramic mug on soapstone. These aren't aesthetic details, they're part of the sensory world that makes the space feel stable and real. A rustic mountain kitchen is, above all, a space where everything has a reason to be there. It's not minimal, but it's intentional. It supports a way of life that values comfort, resilience, and slowness. And when it's done well, it becomes more than a room. It becomes a part of your daily rhythm. It makes most important elements of a rustic mountain kitchen is its layout. The way the space is arranged isn't just about aesthetics, it's about daily use, especially during colder seasons when efficiency, warmth, and comfort are top priorities. In these kinds of kitchens, the layout tends to be compact, centralized, and focused around activity zones that make sense for the rhythm of rural or seasonal life. That includes food preparation, heating, storage, and gathering. Each of these areas needs to be easily accessible, especially when you're moving through the space first thing in the morning, when it's cold, and you're still waking up. For example, it's common in mountain homes to place the cooking zone close to the sink and prep surfaces. There's usually very little wasted space between where ingredients are stored, where they're chopped, and where they're cooked. This creates a natural flow that supports slower morning routines. Making coffee, heating a pot of porridge, preparing something hearty that might simmer for hours on the stove. In some homes, there may be a central hearth or wood-burning stove. When that's the case, the entire layout tends to be anchored around the heat source. Not just for nostalgia, but for function. The stove warms the room. It may also serve as a cooking surface. And it often becomes the gravitational center for anyone who enters the space. If this is part of your design, consider how nearby surfaces and storage respond to that central heat. Place everyday items within reach, avoid putting anything heat-sensitive nearby, and use surrounding materials that absorb and hold warmth. Another layout consideration is the transition from outdoors to in. Mountain kitchens often sit near a back entrance or mudroom. That means you may be coming in from snow, rain, or ice, carrying wood or wearing boots. The layout should make space for this. Durable flooring, open hooks for coats and scarves, perhaps even built-in bench seating with storage underneath, it all contributes to a smooth transition between the outdoors and the warmth of the kitchen. You'll also want to think about where people will gather. In many rustic kitchens, there's some form of informal seating. Not necessarily a formal island with bar stools, but maybe a wide butcher block table in the center of the room or a corner bench by the window. These are places for conversation, for reading, for helping with prep work or sipping a hot drink while breakfast simmers. These areas need to feel connected to the rest of the kitchen, not separate from it. The goal with layout in a rustic mountain kitchen is to reduce unnecessary movement, minimize cold transitions, and create zones that support natural use, not staged function. Everything should be easy to reach. The distance between zones should feel compact but not cramped. And most importantly, the room should be able to handle the kind of mess and movement that comes with everyday winter living. In short, it's not about following a design rule, it's about designing to support your actual habits, especially during the coldest months of the year. shape the layout, the next layer to consider is the material palette. In a rustic mountain kitchen, the materials you choose carry the emotional and physical weight of the space. They influence how the room feels underfoot, how it sounds when you move through it, and how it ages over time. And more than anything, they determine how the kitchen performs when it's cold outside. The materials in this kind of kitchen need to do several things at once. They need to be warm, not just in tone, but in thermal performance. They need to be durable, because cold climates and seasonal living put more pressure on surfaces. And they need to feel grounded. Nothing should feel lightweight or fragile. Wood is usually the starting point. It's the most visually dominant and emotionally familiar material in a rustic kitchen. You'll see it in floors, cabinetry, ceiling beams, and open shelving. But not all wood is equal. You're looking for wood that has real mass. Planks with depth, visible grain, and tone variation. Hardwoods like oak, hickory, walnut, or even reclaimed fir work especially well because they hold up under use and age beautifully. You'll want to avoid glossy finishes. A high-sheen polyurethane may protect a surface, but it doesn't belong in a rustic kitchen. Instead, opt for oil-rubbed or matte sealants that allow the texture of the wood to remain tactile. This creates a finish that doesn't reflect artificial light too brightly and doesn't show wear in a distracting way. In fact, the more you use these surfaces, the better they look. Stone is the next essential material. It shows up in countertops, backsplash, fireplace surrounds, and sometimes even floors. The best stones for this type of kitchen are those with natural variation, a matte or honed finish, and a subtle, weathered color palette. Think soapstone, slate, tumbled marble, or unpolished granite. Soapstone is especially effective in cold weather kitchens because of how it holds heat. If you set a pot of hot tea on a soapstone counter, the warmth lingers in the surface for hours. That quality of thermal mass isn't just pleasant, it makes a difference on a cold morning. If your kitchen includes a wood stove or radiant heat, stone surfaces close to those heat sources will help distribute warmth throughout the day. Then there's metal, used for hardware, lighting, and accessories. In a rustic mountain kitchen, you won't see polished chrome or high-gloss finishes. Instead, the metal details tend to be darker, softer, and textured. Wrought iron, blackened steel, bronze, and aged brass are ideal choices. They offer weight and tone variation that complements the heavier wood and stone materials. Metal shows up most frequently in cabinet handles, drawer pulls, pot racks, and lighting fixtures. These items are touched often, and their finishes naturally patina over time. That aging process is part of the appeal. It reinforces the idea that the kitchen is a living space, not a static one. Flooring also deserves special attention. In cold climates, the floor isn't just something you walk on, it's something that can affect how warm you feel in the space. Stone or brick flooring works well with radiant heating systems, but wide plankwood floors can also be effective, especially when paired with wool runners or low-pile rugs in key walking areas. If you're using wood on the floor, it's important to select something dense and properly treated for the fluctuations in humidity that come with mountain climates. Reclaimed or quarter-sawn boards tend to move less and hold up better to seasonal shifts. Finally, consider the secondary materials, things like textiles, ceramics, and glass. These don't dominate the room, but they play a vital supporting role in creating contrast and balance. Textiles soften hard surfaces. Ceramics, especially hand-thrown pieces, add irregularity and tactility. Glass, if used, should be textured, seeded, or slightly smoky rather than perfectly clear. A successful material palette in a rustic mountain kitchen doesn't feel overly coordinated. It should feel like it came together gradually, through use and care. You're not trying to match everything, you're trying to create layers. Layers of tone, temperature, and touch. And ultimately, the materials should help the kitchen do its job, hold heat, resist damage, support movement, and reflect daily use in a way that feels natural, not worn out, but worn in. rustic mountain kitchen, lighting plays a critical role, especially during winter when daylight hours are short and natural light is limited. The way a space is lit in the early morning and late afternoon directly affects how it feels to move through, work in, and spend time within. So in this section, we're looking at both natural light management and artificial lighting strategies, all within the rustic, cold climate context. First, let's talk about natural light. Mountain homes often rely heavily on natural light, not just for aesthetics, but for warmth and rhythm. South-facing windows are especially valuable in a kitchen. They allow low winter sun to pour in during the morning and early afternoon, warming up key zones like the prep counter, the dining nook, or the floor underfoot. When you're designing or renovating a rustic kitchen, it's worth prioritizing these solar gain opportunities. Not only does it help cut down on heating needs, but it also gives the space a clear morning center, a spot where you naturally gravitate when the day begins. But natural light in these kitchens isn't just about where it comes from, it's also about how it's filtered. Because rustic kitchens often feature matte materials, stone, wood, metal, there are few reflective surfaces. Light tends to diffuse and soften across the room rather than bounce sharply. That quality is desirable. It reduces contrast, eliminates glare, and makes everything feel grounded. For windows, this means avoiding glossy trim or ultra-sheer synthetic curtains. Instead, use textured woven fabrics, such as linen or cotton canvas, in warm neutrals or muted earth tones. These materials allow light to pass through without turning it harsh. In winter, heavier drapes can be pulled closed in the evening to help retain heat. And when used in layers, such as a sheer curtain with a thicker wool panel, you get both insulation and versatility. Skylights can also be useful in mountain kitchens, particularly if they're positioned near the stove or work areas. Just keep in mind that unfiltered skylight can create cold spots if it's not properly insulated, so glazing and placement matter. Diffused or frosted skylights are often better than clear ones. Now, let's move into artificial lighting, the more controlled, design-driven element of this discussion. A rustic mountain kitchen should have a layered lighting plan that balances functionality with atmosphere. This means combining three types of light: ambient, task, and accent. Ambient lighting is your general overhead illumination. In rustic kitchens, this often comes from flush-mounted fixtures, pendant lights, or low-hanging chandeliers made from natural or industrial materials, iron, aged bronze, weathered wood. Avoid recessed ceiling lights unless they're placed carefully and finished in a way that blends into wood paneling or exposed beams. The goal is to keep the ambient light soft but consistent. Overlighting the space will make it feel sterile. Underlighting will make the kitchen difficult to work in, especially before sunrise or during heavy snowfall when outdoor light is minimal. A good solution is to use dimmable warm white bulbs, nothing above 2700 K, to ensure that even your brightest settings still feel inviting. Next, task lighting. These are fixtures dedicated to work areas like countertops, the stove, and the sink. Under-cabinet lights are common in modern kitchens, but in rustic spaces, they can be difficult to integrate visually. Instead, consider wall-mounted swing-arm sconces or small, focus spotlights that are manually controlled and match to the metal finishes in your cabinet hardware or ceiling lights. Task lights should be positioned carefully. Too much contrast between work areas and the rest of the room will make the kitchen feel uneven. Instead, aim for consistency in tone and direction. Light should come from the front or sides, not overhead, to reduce shadowing while you chop, stir, or clean. Lastly, accent lighting. This isn't just decorative, it's functional atmosphere. Accent lighting creates warmth and dimension, and it's especially important in early mornings when you don't want the full kitchen lit. This can include a low-wattage lamp on a side counter or open shelf, a soft, backlit panel behind an open spice rack or display cabinet, small LEDs integrated under a wood beam or stone ledge, a wall sconce near the breakfast nook or reading bench. These lights should be easy to switch on independently from the main overheads. Their purpose is to give you the option of moving through the kitchen without waking up the entire room, perfect for when one person rises early and wants a slow, private start to the day. And a note on fixtures and hardware: keep them simple. Rustic kitchens aren't the place for glossy chrome or ultra-modern silhouettes. Go for finishes like iron, burnished brass, or antique bronze. Look for fixtures with exposed bulbs, or with shades made from glass, enamel, or raw linen. If the goal of this kitchen is to make cold mornings easier and more grounded, your lighting design should reflect that. It should feel predictable, not overly bright. It should let the materials shine without making the room feel clinical. And it should give you flexible control throughout the day, because in winter, the difference between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. can be dramatic. In short, light isn't just about vision, it's about comfort. And in the rustic mountain kitchen, light should always feel like pee. Cabinetry is one of the most defining elements in any kitchen. It's also one of the most used, opened and closed every day, touched constantly, relied upon in both subtle and essential ways. In a rustic mountain kitchen, cabinetry does more than just hold dishes and dry goods. It plays a structural, tactile, and even atmospheric role in supporting cold weather living. Let's start with the overall approach to style. In this setting, the cabinetry should never look ornamental or sleek. You're aiming for something that feels integrated with the house itself, almost like it was built alongside the beams, the walls, the floors. Think of the cabinetry as furniture that's been installed for a reason. It needs to feel substantial, not lightweight. The doors should close with a soft but solid sound. The drawers should feel heavy and stable. This is not the place for floating vanities or glossy, handleless modern cabinets. Traditional frame and panel doors work well here. They bring depth to the surface without being overly decorative. Shaker-style fronts are especially popular in rustic kitchens because they provide clean lines, minimal fuss, and timeless durability. If you want to add detail, consider subtle insets or visible joinery, like dovetail joints or forged iron hinges. When it comes to finishes, stay away from thick polyurethane or overly processed lacquers. They'll reflect too much light and make the space feel synthetic. Instead, use oil-rubbed stains, hand-waxed finishes, or even painted cabinets in muted, matte tones. Deep forest greens, stone greys, and warm creams work particularly well because they blend into the room's visual temperature without drawing too much attention. Open shelving is also common in mountain kitchens, but it needs to be used thoughtfully. It's not for display, it's for everyday access. Open shelves near the prep area can hold ceramics, spices, or utensils that are used constantly. The shelf material should match or complement the other woodwork in the kitchen, and the brackets or supports should be visible and strong. Again, nothing should look fragile here. Next, let's talk about the interior organization. Winter-use kitchens require more storage than you might initially assume. That's because you often stock more staples in cold seasons. You might bake more often, store firewood or kindling nearby, and use larger cookware for stews and slow cooking. So the cabinetry design needs to reflect that. Consider deep drawers for cast iron, heavy pans, and bulky cookware. Make sure they're rated for weight and include full extension glides. Pull-out pantry units or slide-out baskets for storing potatoes, onions, and other cold-season vegetables that don't need refrigeration. Vertical dividers for baking sheets and cutting boards, located near prep zones to reduce movement when your hands are cold or full. Dedicated utility cabinets, not just for cleaning supplies, but also for winter tools, wool gloves, and extras like candles, matches, or lanterns in case of storms or outages. You might also consider a dedicated dry pantry area, either as a tall cabinet or a walk-in closet. In a rustic kitchen, the pantry isn't just storage, it's strategy. It helps reduce grocery trips during bad weather, supports batch cooking, and makes the whole space feel more self-reliant. Visually, the cabinetry should blend with the rest of the room. You don't want the storage to feel like a separate layer. Match your cabinet finishes with surrounding materials. For example, if your flooring is reclaimed oak and your counters are soapstone, choose a cabinet tone that falls between those values. This creates continuity, reduces visual clutter, and reinforces the immersive feel of the space. And finally, let's talk about hardware. Cabinet handles, knobs, and latches in a rustic mountain kitchen aren't just accessories. They're interaction points. You touch them dozens of times a day. So choose ones that feel good in the hand, substantial, textured, and naturally finished. Look for forged iron, antique brass, or hand-hammered bronze. Avoid polished nickel or anything too refined. The hardware shouldn't shine, it should deepen over time. It should match the tone of your lighting fixtures, complement your faucet finish, and feel like it belongs in a house where function comes first. In the end, good cabinetry and storage in a rustic kitchen isn't about maximizing storage. It's about prioritizing utility, reducing visual noise, and reinforcing the architecture of the room itself. If you design this part well, you'll end up with a kitchen that doesn't just look right, it works, every day, in every season. By now, we've built out the key architectural and material components of the rustic mountain kitchen. But just as important as the structure is the sensory layer, the combination of color, texture, and surface finish that gives the space its personality, mood, and livability. In this type of kitchen, color isn't just about style, it's part of the comfort system. It helps regulate the mood of the space on gray mornings, cold afternoons, and long, dim evenings. And more importantly, it influences how you experience light, depth, and visual weight when you're in the room. Rustic mountain kitchens typically avoid bright whites or high-contrast palettes. That kind of sharpness can feel too stark in winter environments and too artificial in rooms filled with natural materials. Instead, the colors here are grounded, tones pulled from the natural landscape: clay, iron, pine, bark, river stone, and dry wheat. Cabinetry often takes on earth tone shades. Deep olive, warm charcoal, slate blue, and ochre are all common. They're strong, but not loud. They create visual warmth and allow metal fixtures, wood grain, and stone texture to show through without being overpowered. If you're working with painted cabinetry, use matte or eggshell finishes, not satin or gloss. These finishes absorb light, reduce glare, and feel more organic alongside raw or aged surfaces. For walls and ceilings, neutral but rich base tones tend to work best. A warm off-white with a yellow or red undertone creates a backdrop that supports wood and stone without flattening them. Pale mushroom gray, soft taupe, and clay-toned beige are also useful, especially when paired with darker trim or visible ceiling beams. The key is subtle variation, not uniform brightness. Now let's move into texture, which in a rustic kitchen is just as important as color, sometimes more so. Texture tells you how the space should feel, even before you touch it. It softens hard surfaces, reduces visual repetition, and makes the room easier to live in. Start with the big surfaces. Wood should feel like wood, you should see the grain, feel a bit of movement under your hand. You don't want glass smooth finishes here. Instead, choose planks with light distressing, wire-brushed surfaces, or hand-planed detail. These finishes don't just look better, they also hide small dents, scratches, and dust that are part of daily life. Stone, too, should have a tactile quality. Honed or tumbled finishes are far better than polished surfaces. They hold warmth better, they don't show fingerprints as easily, and they give the space a quiet sense of permanence. If you're using a stone backsplash, Think about irregularity. Something with chipped edges, rough cuts, or natural seams is going to feel far more appropriate than something cleanly geometric. Even metal should feel textured. Hardware and fixtures in this kind of kitchen aren't supposed to look new. Hammered finishes, forged pieces, and oxidized tones all create variation in light and shadow that keeps the space grounded. Smaller surfaces and accents can add another layer of texture. Open shelving may hold glazed ceramics, baskets, linen towels, and wood-handled tools, all of which reinforce the idea that this is a kitchen made for use, not display. If you're adding fabrics, seat cushions, curtains, or runners, look for woven materials in natural fibers. Wool, cotton, and linen are all ideal. Avoid synthetics that are too uniform or too smooth, they'll clash with the environment around them. Finally, let's talk about finish. In a rustic kitchen, finishes should serve a few key purposes: protect surfaces, deepen color, and age gracefully. For wood, natural oil finishes are the best fit. They penetrate the grain without sealing it completely, which allows the material to breathe and respond to changes in humidity. They also darken slightly over time, which enhances the character of the space rather than erasing it. Stone should be sealed with breathable, non-glossy products that prevent staining without turning the surface reflective. Avoid epoxy or resin coatings unless absolutely necessary, they'll add shine that doesn't belong here. Even painted surfaces can be finished in a way that respects the setting. Use a mineral-based or clay-based paint if possible, and layer the color by hand. Slight inconsistencies in brushwork, tone, or texture actually add to the room's authenticity. In the end, the goal of color, texture, and finish in a rustic mountain kitchen is simple: make the space feel durable, inviting, and calm. You're not designing to impress someone walking through. You're designing for someone waking up early, reaching for a mug, and spending the next hour in a room that feels like it was made exactly for that moment. By this point, you've built the bones of your kitchen. The layout is functional. The materials are durable. The cabinetry works hard. And the lighting creates mood and clarity throughout the day. But now we move from construction to experience, to how this space supports you and shapes your daily rhythm, especially on cold mornings when everything feels a little slower and more intentional. A rustic mountain kitchen isn't designed for speed. It's designed for presence. The value of the space is revealed over time, particularly in the routines that begin before sunrise, when the room is still quiet and the rest of the house hasn't fully woken up. These are the moments when the kitchen becomes more than just a workspace. It becomes a refuge. Imagine stepping in from a bedroom still holding on to the night's chill. The floor under your feet is solid, maybe wide plankwood with a wool runner beneath the stove, or cool stone that's just beginning to warm up from radiant heat. You flip on a single light, not the full overheads, just a low wattage lamp near the coffee station or a small sconce by the open shelf. It's enough. The shadows soften. The grain of the wood is visible. The space doesn't glare back at you, it welcomes you quietly. There's a rhythm to what you reach for. A kettle that always sits on the stove. A mug that lives on the lower shelf, worn at the rim from years of use. Coffee grounds in a jar you refill weekly. A drawer that opens easily to a linen towel. Nothing is rushed. And more importantly, nothing is over-designed. Everything has earned its place. That sense of atmosphere is hard to fake. It comes from materials that age naturally, surfaces that don't need constant attention, and a layout that reflects how you move through the room when you're still waking up. The stove is where it should be. The window, if you have one, frames the first bit of light breaking over the mountains or filtering through mist. If you're lucky enough to have a fire in the room, the sound of wood catching adds another layer to the experience. And here's the thing, this morning routine isn't special because it's rare, it's special because it's repeatable. The kitchen doesn't need to impress anyone. It needs to perform consistently, quietly, reliably. That's where atmosphere comes from. Not from stage design details, but from usefulness and rhythm. You might find that over time, your rustic kitchen becomes a kind of archive for these small patterns. A hook near the door that always holds your winter gloves. A bench where you put on boots. A drawer that contains not just tools, but little objects collected over years, matches, a thermometer, a small notebook for grocery lists. The space starts to mirror the season, your habits, your needs. And this is where we see the strength of rustic design. It holds space for life as it is, not as it looks in a magazine. Cold mornings aren't glamorous, but they're real. They require a space that functions without pretense. That holds warmth. That makes it easy to be still. So if you're designing or renovating your own rustic mountain kitchen, think about these moments. Not just where the tile will go or what faucet to choose, but what you'll be doing at 6:30 in the morning when the snow hasn't melted yet. Will your hands know where to go? Will the light make you want to stay for a moment longer before the day begins? Because in the end, the purpose of this kitchen isn't just to feed. It's to support, to stabilize, to become part of the background of a life that values pace, resilience, and comfort. We've spent the last hour unpacking every layer of the rustic mountain kitchen, from layout and materials to texture, lighting, and everyday experience. And if there's one core idea that connects it all, it's this: a kitchen should serve your life, not the other way around. The rustic mountain kitchen isn't trying to be modern. It's not chasing a trend. It's built with intention, for people who live with the seasons, who cook from scratch, who wake up early and stay grounded through routine. It respects the value of function, of temperature, of wear. And it understands that beauty is not the absence of use, but the accumulation of it. Designing a kitchen like this means stepping away from the pressure to make things look perfect. It means accepting that materials will change with time. That the wood will darken, the stone will soften, the hardware will develop a patina. These aren't flaws. They're signs that the room is working as it should. But beyond materials and layout, a rustic kitchen like this supports your real life. The kind of life where the floor is sometimes wet with snow, where mugs are left on counters, where boots dry by the door and a basket of firewood lives just inside. It's a space built for presence, for being in the room without having to manage it constantly. So when you begin planning your own kitchen, whether you live in the mountains or just want to bring a bit of that grounded energy into your home, start with the questions that matter most. How do you move through your mornings? What materials feel good in your hand? What do you need to reach without thinking? Where does the light fall, and how does it shape your mood? Because those questions are the foundation of real design. Not color swatches or catalog spreads, but lived patterns. That's what the rustic mountain kitchen honors. And that's why it holds up, season after season, year after year.
Charette Theory, we believe design should support how you live, not distract from it. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a style that's as resilient as it is restful. If you're building, renovating, or simply rethinking your space, we hope this episode gave you not just ideas, but clarity.
And remember, the best kitchens don't just keep you warm. They give you room to be yourself, quietly, daily, and with purpose. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.